Okay, welcome to the Navigating the OER Landscape webinar, co-hosted by M.O.S.T and MarylandOnline. I'm going to read the slide that's up there in case there's anybody who doesn't have the visual. I had actually written all these titles out for our illustrious speakers, but I see that they're nicely written and a beautiful slide up there. But I do want to introduce them, and they will go ahead and give you a little bit more background once I turn it over to them. Dr. M.J. Bishop is the director of the William E. Kerwin Center for Academic Innovation with the University System. Dr. Karen Rege is the Dean of Teaching, Learning, and Innovation at Harford Community College. And Cynthia Steinhoff is the director of the library at Arundel Community College. And with that, I'm going to mute myself and turn it over to the speakers. Again, welcome.
Great, thank you so much, Wendy. And the Maryland Open Source Textbook Initiative is really happy to be able to co-sponsor this with MarylandOnline. And I'll add my welcome to Wendy's. We have a record turnout here for this session, so we're really excited about it. I'm going to kick off just by providing a little definitions and context. Yeah, and I'm going to get out of video mode here so you all aren't looking at my face here in my office. I'm going to provide a little definitions and context. Karen is going to, I'm going to kick it over to Karen after that to talk about actual types of providers. Cynthia is on the line to help us with some conversation about libraries as providers. And then we're going to reserve a little time towards the end to provide some additional context about the current and future state of and landscape for OER. And hopefully have a little time towards the end for some questions. So, so let me get started, and let's just begin right off the bat with a definition of open educational resources. So OER are resources that reside in the public domain or have been released under an intellectual property license that permits their free use and repurposing by others. And one mystery that I have yet to answer is whether OER is plural or singular. So if anybody can answer that for me later, I would appreciate it. But I find when I'm doing these presentations, I often refer to OERs. Like, for example, OERs can be anything. They can be video, text, photographs, simulations, assessments, PowerPoints, really just about any kind of instructional material that you can think of can be openly licensed. And what we mean when we say openly licensed, and I apologize, this is a little fuzzy, but many of you are familiar with what has been called commonly the 5 R's. That when something has been openly licensed under a Creative Commons license, and the most open of those is CC BY, it gives you permission to retain the thing, reuse it, revise it, remix it, or redistribute. So by retain, we mean you can own and control your own copy of the content. It's something that you get to hold on to forever. If you've downloaded it, it's on your hard drive, you get to continue to hang on to it. You can, of course, reuse it in its unaltered form, or you can revise it, adapt, adjust, and modify or improve it in any way that you see fit. You can remix it, so you can take the original and add other content in order to create something new, and then you can send that back out. Share your copies of the original either in its unaltered form or any revisions or remixes that you've made with others. Of course, all of this, as I said before, is contingent upon the Creative Commons license. And in this case, if you do any of these things, if I've created something and you've taken my work and done some revisions, some remixing, redistributing, you need to give me attribution. So by CC BY, and it is BY, not BYE or BUY, CC BY means who is it by? Give the original author attribution for the content. There are many other Creative Commons licenses. We don't have nearly enough time to get into all of that now, but each additional layer of Creative Commons licensing creates some more restrictions. So, for example, you can say that you can use it, but you can't make any changes to it, or you can use it, but you can't benefit commercially from it, and so forth. So if you're not familiar with Creative Commons licenses, I encourage you to go out to their website And actually, Wikipedia does a pretty good job of summarizing some things as well. So I encourage you to take a look at some of those materials. But as it says at the top of the slide, you know, one of the things and actually if we go back to the original definition, you know, the reason that OER, oops, I'm going back the wrong way. The reason that OERs are free is because of that intellectual property license. And that in fact, just being free does not make something an open educational resource. It has to have those 5 R's in order to be considered openly licensed. But unfortunately, we've spent an awful lot of time in the community and in our thinking about what OERs are all about, really focused on the free part, which has been great, you know, because what the free part has done has increased affordability for students. We've increased access. There's some great data out there about what it means when students have access to materials on day 1 of their classes. You know, they're not waiting for their financial aid check in order to purchase their textbooks and so forth. So the free part has been great. But the reality is, you know, it's only free up to a point, right? So many of you have probably heard the phrase, and I can't take credit for this joke, but that OER is free like a puppy. You know, the OERs are, you know, you get the free puppy, but then you're having to pay for his food, for his training, for all the crazy elk antlers I keep buying for this dog, for everything else. And suddenly that free puppy gets pretty expensive. Well, some are beginning to realize, particularly as those of us who are really starting to engage in implementing OER and looking at the ways we're going to scale this across our institutions, we're realizing that while the OER may be free to the students, it's costing our institutions money to guarantee that they are ADA compliant, that they're digital rights compliant, to keep them up to date, to make sure that they continue to be relevant and context sensitive and all of these kinds of things. Those are things that publishers used to do for us in the past, and now we're looking at taking on some of those responsibilities ourselves. So as we begin thinking about sustainability of OER and what it's going to take for this to scale, we're beginning to start to see some debates. So what's happening is that as for example, I'm thinking about how one of the institutions in the USM is going to sustain this over time, I find myself wondering, you know, we've made it free to the students, but the institutions are incurring these costs that they may or may not be able to sustain, because certainly our budgets aren't getting any bigger anytime soon. So how are we going to go about deferring some of these costs that the institutions are taking on? So we're starting to see models, and hence the whole reason for this webinar today, where some OER providers are charging. You know, they're suggesting that we charge students a small fee, $30 maybe, in order to access the materials. But rightly so, there are those that look at that and say, wait a minute, OER is supposed to be free. Why are we charging students for something that should be freely available based on the Creative Commons licenses? So this is starting to create some tensions in the field. It's also starting to create a very wide array of OER providers. With a lot of different business models and so forth. It's getting somewhat confusing. So, you know, we're not here today to endorse any particular kind of provider or business model, but rather to try to give you a sense of the landscape. And I'm going to turn it over to Karen Rege now, who has spent quite a bit of time thinking about this landscape and is going to kind of give us an overview of some of the types of providers. Take it away, Karen.
Okay. Yes, this is, as I call it, the wild, wild west, or at least it used to be back when I was first involved in OERs.
Karen, you might want to get a little closer to your microphone if you can.
All right. Is that any better?
I think so.
Hopefully that's a little bit better. I'll try to speak a little louder too.
That's good.
So back when I first started working in OERs around 2013, 2014, it was really the wild, wild west out there. And there was all kinds of people popping up and providing OERs or what they thought were OERs all over the place very fast. And no one seemed to know what the things were or where to go. And so I started looking at patterns and found that there were some that were sort of clustered in 3 areas around types of platforms or types of providers. And so I'm going to walk you through some of these today, and there's a lot more. You'll see a couple of examples, but we've been keeping a very large spreadsheet that has as many as we can that are documented, and we're getting ready to release that in hopes that other people will continue to add to the document later on. First is our open access textbooks. Most of us are familiar with these. They're very similar to a digitized version of the textbook, and all of the materials in there are generally editable. I know at least OpenStax started out where you were not allowed to edit them, and then it was about 2 summers ago, I believe, that they did open it up and allowed you to edit the materials. The interesting thing about them is they're formatted to look like a regular textbook. So you might find practice questions at the end, summaries. It's graphically laid out to look like a regular textbook. And most of the time, the materials live on a provider's platform, and you access it through a search or a repository of some kind. And we'll go through those a little bit later. But for example, OpenStax is probably the most commonly or the best known one of all. And in order to access the OpenStax textbooks, you generally go to the OpenStax website and create a login, and you can then download the materials and edit them as you please. Many of them, depending upon the platform, are also downloadable in various formats. So, for example, they might be in HTML, but they might also come as a PDF, as an EPUB for readers, like Kindles and things like that. There are some that are also just plain PDF. Some are Word documents. They come in all different formats. Again, it just depends upon the platform and what formats they decide to support, which can be very challenging when we get into accessibility issues. So for example, if it's a PDF and the textbook is only offered as a PDF and it has multiple tables in it, sometimes the tables are not always friendly with screen readers. So we have to take that into consideration as well when you're adopting for use one of these textbooks, unless you're really willing to edit and remix them yourself. And again, when we look at the adoptions for these, this is the easiest way to get your feet wet in OERs, is to take an open access textbook. It doesn't take much more time than if you're reviewing a regular commercially published textbook to go through it and adopt it. And so generally, this is the first step for faculty. Occasionally, you'll see adoptions at the departmental level, and at least, you know, with all the folks who are having a course that has multiple sections using the same textbook. So for example, our Sociology 101 course, Intro to Soc class, is all using the OpenStax textbook, every single section of that particular course. Where in other areas, you might find that the faculty choose to implement what they would like, and it's not a departmental level decision. We are finding that there are some collaborations across various institutions that are gaining traction. For example, when there's groups of folks that are getting together to collaborate on actually writing a textbook. And so we're hoping through M.O.S.T to see a little bit more of that. Next slide, please. So many of you may remember, I'm going to date myself here, but back in the day, we used to go to Kinko's and pick up a course pack, which in the classic version was a sort of Xeroxed copy that was bound together by them of a collection of essays, book chapters, journal articles, all kinds of things, other information material, infographics, things like that. You can actually legally make a course pack as long as the course, all the materials are licensed. So it could include openly licensed material or regularly copyrighted materials that you need to get permission to use, and that you sell it in the campus bookstore at cost. But most people now don't want to use the print, right? They want to be able to access this online. And so there are a number of platforms out there that are allowing you to do just that, where you can sign up for an account on their platform. And often they will have a library already set up where they have a number of well-used OERs, say, for example, some of the textbooks from OpenStax that are already loaded into their database. And you can very easily drag and drop and mix materials. They will also mix materials that have copyright attached to them if you want, and they can often go out and acquire permission. So for example, I'm thinking of PanOpen, which is a site that I've been on for a little bit and watched the development of, where it has a really super nice interface where you literally drag and drop, and then you just say, I really want this chapter from this book, and they will go get the copyright and then tell you how much it's going to cost for them to use that material according to the number of students in your class. And then at the end, they will calculate out for you how much you would have to pay when you put your whole textbook together or your digital course pack together, and then the format that it's going to be in. Sometimes these are formatted as a textbook. Sometimes they are as a collection of essays. Some of the platforms actually offer services like with a graphic designer that can help them look and feel more like a textbook. And the other piece of this is the ancillary materials. So for example, tests or practice tests and review questions and things like that. Many of the materials it can be added in here. You can also find those in the open access textbooks sometimes. They're generally added on later. And I think the same is true here for the digital course packs, where the materials are included often but are not the focus. So you might be focusing on the content of the class and not necessarily on adding in the extra quiz questions and things like that. Again, these live on a provider's website and can be downloaded depending upon the format. And they are generally also adopted by the faculty or at the department level. And again, this gets into a lot more of the creation of the remixing, if you will, than just the plain editing or the plain adoption. And so a couple of examples, I mentioned PanOpen. Lumen Learning has a product called Candela that we've been working with as well. Next slide, please. OpenCourseWare. Now this is where it gets very interesting. There's actually two formats to this. One is a real turnkey, and the other one is called adaptive. And I'm going to talk about the adaptive in a little bit of a later slide, because we think that's where the field is really heading. But the turnkey is actually kind of fun. We call it course in a box, or ready to adopt. Basically, it's a whole entire course, not just the textbook or textbook with ancillary materials or course pack. It's the entire course that contains all of the content, all of the activities, including your assessment. And that's available out there. And these are generally been professionally designed using instructional designers. There is often proprietary materials that you do have to pay a small fee for. And it can include either open or copyrighted materials, or both often. And they are generally formatted to fit the LMS. So you can often add them right in as a course cartridge. So I could get a copy of, we use Blackboard, I could get a copy of the Blackboard course cartridge and drop that entire thing in as a course right into our learning management system. Also, they can come on using an LTI integration. So for example, the Great Books Project, you can actually integrate those directly into that course. And this, of course, obviously contains the ancillary materials, including all your tests and your quizzes and reviews and active learning pieces, activities. These often live on a provider platform, but again, if you're using a course cartridge, these can be downloaded and put directly into the LMS, and they are generally adopted at the department or at the institutional level. So you might find that your biology department wants to have all of the open courses look the same, so they will adopt something from Lumen, from Candela. Actually, I don't know, yeah, I guess this is the Candela platform still, where you can pull down all of that information. Occasionally, the institution will engage in contracts with one of the vendors, say for example, Lumen Learning, to come in and develop materials, OpenCourseWare specifically for your institution. This is where also we begin to see the use of analytics. So the analytics come in to help you understand time on task, number of people who are accessing materials, what materials they're accessing, and some basic analytics that you'll find in the assessment tools as well. But the analytics in these products generally vary in sophistication. So some might be just simple. You had 10 people pass your quiz and 5 people fail, and you had 10 people log in yesterday. And then some of them can get much more sophisticated right down into the actual test question and the number of people who completed that successfully. We'll see analytics again when we get into the adaptive learning. And next slide, please. Okay, so those are the 3 main types of platforms that we're seeing: the open access textbooks, the open course packs, and then the OpenCourseWare. How you find these materials sometimes can make it confusing as well, because they carry content on some of the search engines. So many people know right away Merlot, and Merlot is a absolutely wonderful tool. It's one of the very early products that are out there. And that, while that platform does contain material that you want downloaded, or you want to be able to download, it is a platform that's primarily a search feature or search engine. So it contains materials, but you can go on there and search and drill down, search it very in depth, and put in a lot of filters and search exactly what you're looking for. It does also contain various kinds of content, including course cartridges, textbooks, and all your ancillary materials. You can even break it down to the Lexile level, you know, the reading abilities, or by subject, however you want to break it down. So that's a wonderful tool to have. It's just that it's a little bit challenging to use sometimes, and because it's older, then often you'll find, say for example, an individual chapter on a topic, but it might be in PDF format or something very simple and not have all of the options that you need. So we love Merlot, but you just have to make sure that when you're working with Merlot, you really pay attention to what you're using. OER Commons is a somewhat newer platform, and we're very excited about OER Commons because that is where M.O.S.T is building a hub on OER Commons so that we can share materials across the state. So you'll hear a little bit more about that, I think, at the end, and Jay will come back to that. All right, and next, I think we're going to pass this off to Cynthia.
Sorry, Cynthia, you were muted. Go ahead.
Yeah, okay, thank you. I'm going to talk a little about how libraries and librarians can assist faculty members who want to use OER materials. We've been doing a lot here at Arundel for probably about 8 years. And this year we're hiring, we have a vacancy in our reference department, and the person we're going to hire will have spent about half of their time working with OER. So it's something that we're doing a lot with here. So we're going to look at some different ways that librarians can help find open content, and also some ways that librarians can use material, or that the librarians will help faculty find materials that are available through library sources, usually library databases, that would be available at no charge to students to use. Still would be copyrighted material for the most part, but would be available at no charge. So one of the things that we probably do more than anything else is we help faculty members find an existing open textbook that they can use. And when we first started doing this, there were not that many sources, so often we came up with one textbook that could work in a particular class. And now we're finding, as we research this, that we're finding multiple textbooks that could work in a certain course, so the faculty members do have a choice of what they might want to use. So what we ask the faculty member to do is to provide us with as much detail as they can about the course. A syllabus is great if a syllabus is available, but if it's a new course being developed, it may not have even gotten to that stage yet. So we just ask for as much information as they can tell us about the course. Our librarians will do the research in the different repositories and go directly, say, to OpenStax and some of the other locations where there are open textbooks available, and find textbooks first in that discipline, and then look at the table of contents, look at the supplemental materials, look at the book itself to see if it's going to cover most of what would be available, most of the material that would be taught in that course. And if the faculty member requests it, the librarians will help the faculty evaluate in depth the various textbooks that are available and come to a decision about which one might work for that class. Okay, next slide, please. We also can help faculty members find open materials that are in repositories or just out there on the web to supplement either an open or a traditional textbook. So again, we ask for details about the course, what textbook they're currently using, and what topics that they are specifically looking for some other content in. So then we just go out and we do our searching. We ask them to tell us if they want videos, or if they're looking for assignments, or if they're looking for other formats of materials, and we find a selection of materials that they could use. We will, again, if they're interested in having us do a lot of evaluation with them, we will do that, and help them out in any way we can to get that material. The other thing we can do here is to make sure they're aware of any copyright restrictions, any if there's a Creative Commons license on these items, to help them to understand what they can and can't do with it based on the type of Creative Commons license that is available. And that can be, can sometimes be a little bit difficult to wade through, but we're more than happy to go over that as well. Next slide. We haven't yet helped any faculty members who want to create a course that uses only open material. We've talked to faculty who are thinking about it, but we haven't yet had any takers on that. But I envision that what we would be doing would be, again, we would ask the faculty member to provide us with as much detail as they can about what will be covered in the course. We would locate examples of similar open courses so that they could see what else is already out there. Maybe that would mean they wouldn't need to create their own. They could take something that already exists and do some adaptation, but maybe they still want to pursue creating their own course all with open materials. Then we would just continue to help them find that content that could be incorporated in the course. Again, advising them on the copyright implications, the licensing implications of any of the materials that they would like to use. And then we can advise them on where the course materials might be housed. And of course, we would try to convince them to consider the M.O.S.T Commons as a repository for their course. And more. I mean, we would in this situation do whatever we possibly could to help a faculty member get the kinds of materials in open formats to use for a course that they're creating from scratch. Next slide. One of the other things that we have been doing a lot of late is helping faculty members use materials from the library's electronic resources. And they're using them in some cases to completely replace a textbook. We've got at least one faculty member doing that, and we're working with another faculty member to do that hopefully within the next year or so. Sometimes the traditional thing that we would usually do would be help faculty find materials from our databases that would supplement a course. But in this case, we've been working with, working with faculty where they just completely replace a textbook, a traditional textbook that would be used for the class. Most of the time, these are not open resources, although we do see a few here and there that are, but mostly they are copyrighted materials, but they are available at no cost because the institution is paying for the subscriptions, and might I add, paying a lot in some cases for these subscriptions to databases. At my library right now, the formats that you see on the slide are ones that are available. We can find articles, we can find digital books, or in some cases we have faculty using just chapters from a couple of digital books as readings in lieu of a textbook. We have an image database where we can find lots and lots of images. That image database does contain a lot of open images as well. We can find streaming films, and we can find streaming audio that could be embedded in a course that faculty member wants to teach with no textbook. Next slide. So here are I'm going to do three specific projects that we've been working on recently with faculty to use materials for library databases. There's two on this slide and then one on the next one. One we're currently working on. We recently revised the first two English courses that most students take when they come here, what would typically be known as freshman English. And we're starting to work with them for the first semester of that sequence of two courses, where the students are writing what the faculty are calling a guided paper, where the students are doing a research paper, but the faculty member is providing them with a lot of the resources that they would need to write that paper, rather than just turning them loose in the library to find the materials on their own. And what those materials that will be provided to the student will look like are journal articles or book chapters from library databases. We are working now with, I think it's about 6 or 8 of the novels or other books that the students would typically be reading in those classes, and would be the basis for these guided papers that they're writing. And we're finding 4 or 5 journal articles or chapters that the students would then use as resources for writing those papers. So this is a very specific sort of activity where there is a particular literary work, and we're needing to find certain articles that can support what the faculty members want students to do with those papers that they'll be writing on that literary work. Links will be placed in Canvas for all of these resources, and that's how the students then will access them, is by going into the databases through Canvas. So that's one project that's still in the works right now. The next one is also still in the works. We've been working with this particular faculty member for a couple of years. This is a faculty member who teaches philosophy, and right now uses a textbook that's a collection of readings from famous philosophers over the years. And for much of the material being used in that class currently, in that book of readings that is a traditional textbook that the students have to pay for. Much of what is available in that textbook is also available in books that are now in the public domain. So the librarian is working to find books or chapters of books, primarily public domain materials for most of it, that will be used in lieu of this book of readings that the faculty member is currently using. We may end up needing to put a few library database articles in there too. We're not completely sure about that part of it yet, but we're having quite a bit of good luck in finding something that can replace the actual readings that they do as part of that course. And we're hoping that this will be finally in place in perhaps another year. This faculty member is moving a little bit slowly on this one, and that's fine. That's good. We want it to be right. We don't necessarily want to go through it quickly. Next slide. Okay, so this project was one that we did a couple of years ago. This one took quite a bit of time, and the faculty or the librarian who was working on it was really excited about this, and she was willing to spend the time to help this faculty member achieve his goal. It's actually, the faculty member teaches a course in our academic literacy department, developmental reading class, and he had been using a paperback collection of readings. It was considered a textbook, that's often used in social problems classes, sociology classes in general. It's a textbook that's pretty wide-ranging in where it can be used. The readings were all fairly current within the last, I'm going to say, 10 years. All of them came from magazines, journals, newspapers. In some cases, there were some book chapters, and every single item in that readings book that they were using was copyrighted. The textbook ran about $90 to $100 the last time he used it, which was, I think, 2 years ago. So I'm sure it's more expensive than that right now. So what the librarian did was she first tried to find the same items that were in that in the current edition of the textbook, the Book of Readings. Tried to find them in their original source in perhaps a magazine, or in the case of a book chapter, in the book. The magazine, and then she would look in our databases to see if that magazine or journal with the article was available, or if we already had an ebook that contained we already had the ebook that contained one of the chapters, or if we could acquire that book as an ebook. We had really good luck. We found, I think it was at least half of the articles or chapters from that Book of Readings that we were able to supply in some other format that would work. Either it was a book, either it was in a library database of journals, or it was in an ebook that we already owned or could acquire. The faculty member said that he was not wedded to using having to have every single article or chapter that appeared in that Book of Readings, because there were so many of them that most of the time he didn't use all of them during the semester. And for things that if we couldn't find some of these articles in our journals, or couldn't find a book chapter somewhere, we were to feel free to try to find similar articles or chapters, but on the same theme. And we did some of that. In the end, he decided that finding about 50% of the same articles or chapters, and then having a few additional articles from journals was perfectly acceptable. And he's been doing that now for a couple of semesters. His students really, really like it. There was some concern at first about the students not really needing that textbook to be able to keep on track, but they are working quite well through Canvas to find the links to the articles or the chapters and linking out to them, downloading them. Sometimes they print them, sometimes they don't, but it really does seem to be working very well for him. And the students like it, of course, because they don't have to buy a textbook that costs them $100. And I just wanted to mention a couple of things, and you'll get these slides later so that you can see, you'll have the links to these sources. We developed a research guide to open educational resources, and it's the URLs given there on the slide. We update this. We started this, oh gosh, it's probably been 7 years ago. Like I said, it's been about 8 years we've been working on this. And so about 7 years ago, we created the guide. And at that point, the landscape was such that it was changing so rapidly that about every other month we were having to update this, either changing a URL or removing an OER site that was no longer there, or adding new ones. And things have become much more stable. We usually go through this about twice a year and make any updates to it. So it is fairly current. I think we did it at the end of the spring semester, was the last update to it. But that's on our website. Feel free to take a look at that. When I talk about some of I mentioned earlier, public domain works and books that are out of copyright, mainly in conjunction with that philosophy course we're working on. These are 3 sources that I find to be very useful for these kinds of materials. And I listed it in the order that I prefer to use them. I would go to HathiTrust first, then Internet Archive, and then Google Books last. So since I get asked about this often, I just decided to go ahead and put it in on a slide this time. Okay, I think we're ready to move back to MJ.
Yep, thank you, Cindy. And I'll encourage you and Karen both to stay off mute now, because I'm counting on you guys to kick in here as we go through
Okay.
a little discussion here about the current and future landscape of providers. So we just heard from Cindy all about the great things happening at Arundel, and I think one of the things that we're really seeing across the board is the extent to which the library's role is expanding into this space. So, you know, really essentially reinventing themselves to support this kind of work and make better use both of OER and also, as Cindy mentioned, you know, some of the existing databases of materials that our libraries are already paying buku bucks for. You know, the distinction there between the two, though, of course, is, as Cindy pointed out, that typically what's in those databases are going to be copyrighted materials, not openly licensed materials, as compared to the OER. And we'll talk a little bit more about some of that value proposition here in a bit. But what I'm seeing across the state and across the country increasingly is that folks are hiring OER specialists. In fact, I just learned yesterday, I don't know if anybody's on the line from the College of Southern Maryland, but apparently they've recently hired an OER specialist as well. So as we're doing the work statewide, I'm, you know, continuing to have discussions with CALD, the Congress of Academic, help me out, Cindy.
Congress of Academic Library Directors
Thank
of
you.
Maryland.
Yes, along with the Maryland Association of Community Colleges Libraries and the USM group and so forth. So really excited to be engaging in a much bigger way with the libraries. Another thing that we've done recently through the Maryland Open Source Textbook Initiative is appoint Colleen McKnight as our very first library fellow. Colleen is actually going to be our point person on the M.O.S.T OER Commons site that we're creating. It's a mini site. It's actually called M.O.S.T Commons. We took the OER part out, but it's basically a white labeled version of OER Commons, but also a place where we're going to be able to develop interinstitutional collaborations and projects where, for example, we might have folks from across the state collaborating on a particular pocket of OER that either needs to be curated or developed or augmented and so forth. So really excited, as Karen mentioned, about M.O.S.T Commons and about some of the potential there for us to engage in ways, as we call it here, to leverage our systemness, so to speak, in that, you know, the things that we can do collectively often either can be more efficient or more effective than what we might be able to do individually. So we're excited about those things. Anything else you want to add on this slide? Oh, by the way, Colleen is at Frederick Community College. If anybody on the line doesn't already know her, she's been doing just some amazing work for us with the M.O.S.T Commons. Did I do okay, Cindy?
That's fine. Great.
Good. All right. The second big category of places where we're seeing is the three of us were talking about kind of what was happening currently and where things we think are moving forward is in the evolving technologies. And as Karen alluded to a little bit ago, this whole conversation about the analytics behind the OER is, in my view, so my background's instructional design and technology, I look at the potential for the analytics to really take us to the next level around our continuous improvement of instructional materials. So when we get into courseware that doesn't just provide that kind of varying landscape of analytics as Karen described, but really starts to get into the adaptive piece, what we begin to see is the opportunity for us to understand what's, in a much more nuanced way, what's working and what's not working for students, and give us the data back that will allow us to make formative adjustments in our courses, or come back later and say, you know, chapter 4 just has never resonated with my adult learners. I need to go back and change all the examples. You know, they're currently aimed at 18-year-olds and instead make the examples much more relevant within the context of my learners. So lots of things happening in that space. We're seeing Carnegie Mellon and the Online Learning Initiative is what it used to be called, OLI. Lumen Learning's Waymaker does this work too. The danger here, however, and I'm going to kick it to you here in a sec, Karen, to see what else you want to add, but the danger here is that the current technologies in some regard, and so what we're hearing is people that are objecting to this, because what they're saying is that the OER is getting locked down behind a firewall for which students are having to pay. So when OLI or Lumen Learning's Waymaker product is distributed, it does come with a student fee. And what both of those folks would argue, Norman Beer and David Wiley, is that what you're paying for is the platform here, not the OER. And there's, getting back to that debate slide, there's a lot of debate around this. Some folks are calling this open wrapping. But the reality is the technology is not allowing the OER as easily to exist independently of all the analytics that get kind of embedded in it. I hadn't thought of this before, Karen, but it's a little bit like the Borg, right? So the OER is getting all these implants in it in order to be able to, if you're a Star Trek fan, in order for the analytics to be possible. And as a result, it no longer really lives as much like OER, or at least isn't as easily extracted that way. So what I think we're going to see as technologies continue to evolve is that those two things being much more separatable. So in other words, it's going to be possible really literally to purchase the platform that's going to allow you as the faculty member to take the OER you want to work with and wrap analytics around it. We're not there yet, but I think that's a really exciting development that I think we're probably 3 to 5 years on the horizon away from that being possible. Karen, what else do you want to kick in on this one?
I just wanted to kick in the role of the regular commercial publishers, and with the OER, how, one, they're scrambling. They've been losing a lot of business to OERs, which in some ways is a good thing. But at the same time, I think they're capitalizing on this concept of wrapping and creating platforms of their own around the adaptive learning piece and using the base content as OERs. So for example, they might go out and take chapters from an OpenStax textbook and then wrap the analytics piece and tying it into the assessments especially, and wrap that kind of around it. And then, like you were saying, MJ, marketing it in a whole new way, but as the platform and not necessarily the OER. And they've done that in a number of cases. All of the major publishers, I think, right now are working on this kind of technology that's happening here. And then a couple of other things around OpenCourseWare. Why I think adaptive learning is where we're heading in the future is because of, one, it's personalized, and we know that this younger generation, Generation Z, is very much into personalized learning, and that adaptive learning, the content can be released to the students upon mastery of the skills. So the students just see what they need to see. They take an assessment on it. There's a very close alignment between the learning objectives and the assessment, and that's where a lot of, for example, OLI has been spending a lot of time analyzing their the data that's coming back from the assessment, and then going back and refining the content according to the learning objectives. And that is a very close relationship there, to the point where we're seeing a whole new field called learning engineering being developed, which is the intersection of instructional designers and learning scientists, as well as
data people.
Data people, yeah.
Yeah, the analytics people.
Yep. So, but I think this is really where we're going to be headed in the future, is that this more open courseware platform that has all the adaptive learning pieces in there. So if I'm thinking on the commercial side, we've seen a lot of things like the Pearson MyLabs and the McGraw-Hill Connects, but these are actually a little bit a souped up level, I guess you could say. The analytics in there are a lot more complex, a lot more sophisticated, and we're seeing that again as a wrapper around the OERs and creating these new platforms.
In a way that allows both things to be independent of each other. The product I've seen recently, I think they're calling it OpenText out of McGraw-Hill. And, Karen, I think you're right. The advantage that the commercial publishers have is deep pockets, right? So, the Carnegie Mellons and even Lumen Learning, as a startup, just has not yet had the resources really to be able to move in this direction, which I think is very exciting. Another thing we're seeing is changing business models, and a big one that I'm sure you all have heard about, if not it will probably be coming to a theater near you soon, is this whole notion about inclusive access. So this is where the publishers, Cengage, Pearson, will come to your institution and say, basically, you know, we're going to give you access to, or your students access to all of, you know, our library, our catalog, for a set fee per semester, like $125 or something along those lines. This is a model, as the slide says, that's been developed by the commercial publishers. It may include or not include copyrighted content. But it is typically either, you know, it's something that's getting sold to the student. The institution can sign the contract, but it can also be marketed and sold to the individual student through a bookstore or something along those lines. And, you know, it's a limited access model. So the students are paying for the access, but it will last for, you know, X number of weeks, or, you know, 2 semesters, or whatever that time might be. So unlike OER, where you get to retain these materials as long as you choose, it's sort of more like renting a textbook or something along those lines. So the concerns here, there are lots of folks that if you haven't had a chance, look up open or inclusive access on the Chronicle or Inside Higher Ed. There's lots of articles about it. Concerns about academic freedom. So you can imagine your institution striking a deal like this with Cengage, and now you're being, as a faculty member, encouraged, using my air quotes, to draw only required texts or recommended texts from Cengage products. And, you know, it smacks a little bit of a monopoly as well, in that, you know, most of the contracts now are being required to allow students to opt out if they choose to do so, but often these fees are being wrapped right into a student technology fee or something along those lines, and it's not allowing students as much flexibility about the choices they're making around purchasing and not purchasing textbooks and so forth. So this one, keep an eye out. You know, the publishers are eager, of course, to stay in business, and we're starting to see a lot of clever ways in which they're, you know, yeah, again, we're trying to be agnostic here, and I think, you know, they're doing their best to try to reduce costs for our students. Sometimes the way in which they're going about it may or may not be something that we're particularly comfortable with, and it's just something you have to keep an eye on. Karen or Cindy, anything else to add on that one?
I'll just add that I just learned, I guess actually since the last time MJ and Karen and I all spoke about this, that we have several programs here on our campus who wanted to try this inclusive access from Cengage. So our bookstore is starting to collect some data on where there's sort of a break-even point. Where do the students really start saving money? How many courses do they have to take before they actually save anything? It's being used by, I think it's 2 departments. Okay. So we may have some research to share after the end of this semester or at the end of the academic year about how it's working. A lot of concerns, though, a lot of concerns about it, just for the reasons that MJ mentioned a few minutes ago.
Well, we'll keep an eye on that. Okay, so watching my time here, wanted to also note, as the 3 of us have been talking about the future of OER, I think, you know, another thing that comes to mind, of course, is accessibility. You know, the 2017 Textbook Affordability Act out of the Maryland legislature was very clear about the fact that as we are thinking about OER, they should be both openly licensed and fully accessible. Because I think, you know, as the slide says, this is our chance to get it right this time from the start. Instead of being reactionary, instead being proactive about the ways in which we're thinking about accessibility. As a result, the Maryland Open Source Textbook Initiative is working closely with the National Federation for the Blind, and we've reached out to the National Federation of the Deaf as well and other accessibility organizations to see how we might collaborate on helping build awareness, understanding exactly what we should be doing in the way we create and adapt these materials for use in our courses, and doing the best we can to make sure that things that we're curating around OER and also contributing back to the OER community are in fact fully accessible. So, you know, things like Universal Design for Learning, we're exploring Blackboard Ally, which is a plugin to Blackboard that allows, that will literally do like a web crawl across your Blackboard LMS instance to see where there are concerns and issues around accessibility, which is very cool. And Karen, you added VPAT, and I'm blanking at the moment on what we wanted to say about that.
I'll just back up quickly on Blackboard
Sure.
Ally. Blackboard Ally, even though it is owned by Blackboard Company, it was developed by a third party. And so it is compatible with other LMS systems, for example, Canvas. So I would urge you to take a look at this product. It's really making a difference in the world of OER and learning for people with disabilities in particular. And it does also deliver content in various formats on the fly. So for example, if you need an EPUB version on the fly, it can do that. So definitely take a look at that product. The VPAT statement, the Voluntary Product Accessibility Template, is basically a document that you can request from a vendor of any kind, especially in technology, but we look at it with the publishers or anybody who's creating content to make sure that things are accessible. So it's basically the vendor will describe how they are meeting accessibility requirements, and you can ask for a VPAT statement. In fact, for those of us in Maryland, it is part of the COMAR regulations for certain types of software. So make sure that you ask for a VPAT statement.
Thank you for that. So wrapping things up, and then we'll leave a couple of minutes if folks have questions. You know, as I've been presenting on OER across the state and nationally, have been thinking a lot about, you know, what's really gonna amount to transformative use of OER over time. And, you know, we hear a lot from folks about, if you look at this x-axis in terms of integration level, which is essentially scale, you know, moving from a sporadic integration of OER on our campuses up to being much more strategic, you know, first thinking in terms of Z degrees and all of gen ed, but then thinking quite a bit about OER as the first option as we're thinking about courses. You know, there's a lot of talk and a lot of discussion around that. We've seen other states, SUNY, New York, SUNY and CUNY, for example, that are being funded at great levels by their governors to think hard about how to achieve that kind of scale. But I think, you know, as we've been talking about it within M.O.S.T, we're also very interested in the implementation model, this y-axis. So, you know, thinking beyond just the affordability piece where we're simply swapping textbooks with the OER, and beginning to think very differently about how we're teaching with OER, how we might redesign our courses around OER, and then eventually, as we were saying before, with some of the newer technologies that are on the horizon, really re-envisioning things like continuous improvement of instructional materials and the ways in which the fact that these are actually openly licensed is going to allow us to make those kinds of changes. So, you know, when we adopt copyrighted materials, we can't make that change when we see that it is needed to be made. So just sort of a little schematic there about how we might think a little differently about that. The Maryland Open Source Textbook Initiative is here to support this work across the state. We are examining all of these questions and concerns, and happy to talk with anybody that's interested in learning more about what we're doing through M.O.S.T. It is being led out of the Kerwin Center, but it's in partnership with MarylandOnline, the Maryland Association of Community Colleges, and MICUA, the Maryland Independent Colleges and Universities Association. So we're excited about it and looking to do what we can to support faculty adoptions and ensure that faculty are rewarded for this work when they're engaged in it. So we didn't leave much time for questions, but we would very much value if you don't have a question, at least thinking about what you might like to see in terms of upcoming webinars, what you'd like to see in the future, any other feedback that you might have for us.
Do we have any questions? I don't see any typed in.
Okay.
We are getting close to the end of the time. I did want to mention that, again, that we're going to be sending the slides and the link to the recording back. And if you have questions after that, please, you can pretty much get in touch with any of us. And in addition, you can, sorry, that was my phone. We have a couple of face-to-face sessions that'll be coming up on OERs, and I will send that information to everyone as well. We do have some space available. They're going to be in the next couple of weeks, including Karen Rege will be doing a session for us, kind of elaborating a little bit on what she touched on today. So I want to thank everyone. I'm taking a quick look. I do see a question that says, please email the presentation. The question was, how do you start the conversation with faculty? Getting to the end of the very, very end of the webinar, but I don't know if you have time to just
I think I would just real quickly say, and Karen, I'll let you guys kick in, and Cindy too, but I think appealing to the value propositions here. I think the affordability piece is huge, but the opportunity to engage with materials that are going to free you up from the textbook to teach the way you want to teach. And we've got a lot of folks who would be happy to talk to faculty about that. Karen, Cindy?
We started more with some informal chats with faculty because, and a lot of it was the faculty coming to us or coming to the academic deans wanting to know more about this. They heard it mentioned at a conference. They heard it mentioned on TV. Maryland State Legislature debated it for a couple of years before passing some textbook affordability law. So it was, kind of hitting them in different directions. They weren't quite sure what it was. And it got to the point where enough of these questions were coming through that we decided to start offering some workshops about OER during our convocation at the start of each semester's fall and spring semesters. And those were all done by the library for the most part. And we've just sort of kept on doing that sort of thing to make sure that the faculty are become knowledgeable about OER, are kept up to date with changes, that sort of thing.
And I would recommend getting your Center for Excellence in Teaching and Learning, or whatever acronym you use for that. Get the faculty professional development folks involved. They can be very helpful. In fact, we've worked on creating some communities of practice or teaching circles around OER, and had some really great discussion going about it. So again, that would be another resource. I think we had someone who had a hand raised here also to do an oral question.
Yeah, can you hear me? This is Scott.
Yep.
Hey, Karen.
Hey, Scott.
I'm just wondering, people from different institutions, as I'm trying to implement OER materials to keep costs down, I teach anatomy and physiology, so a lot of what I have is visual, and I'm finding students are trying to print copies of a lot of stuff. And so at our institution, we have an allotment of how many copies students can print for the year. And I find students kind of blowing through that pretty quick. Do you, at any other institutions, have ideas on, it's like they're saving money with the textbook, but then they're putting money out to take copies because but they want a color copy so they can see that an artery looks different than a vein and so forth. Do you see where I'm getting at?
Mm-hmm. How are you otherwise making these materials available to students? Is it just through the LMS or?
Yeah, so we use Blackboard, and so I have all of my materials uploaded there. And some students will bring, a laptop or tablet or whatnot, and they'll use that either during class or in the laboratory. But when they're reviewing notes, or when they're in the lab reviewing structures, on models and so forth, they're bringing out piles of photocopies that they had made. And
So we've,
it's like a trade-off. So we don't pay
yeah.
for the textbook, but now I have nothing to write on, so we're making these copies. And because they want to make color ones, it tends, it zaps through there. And I was just wondering if anybody had any ideas how to help maybe reduce those kinds of costs, or if anybody even has those issues.
So one thing that we've been giving some thought to through the M.O.S.T initiative as kind of a central support for that, and it's not an immediate answer or solution for your problem, but we've been looking at whether it might make sense to centrally purchase something that's called an espresso machine. I'm sure there's others that are out there now, but it is a huge printer that would allow students to print out OER materials. And the idea actually came from the dean of the libraries at College Park, who said, we could integrate the interlibrary loan system to allow students to make requests of this centralized espresso printer. They'd have to wait a day or so for the materials to arrive, but that would allow them to do that in a much more efficient and cost-effective way instead of, like you said, running off loads of prints off of printers in the library.
Awesome, thank you.
Mm-hmm. Okay, I think we're past time, so we should probably let folks go. Wendy, you want to sign off?
I will close the meeting now. Thank you all, and you'll get more information from us in just probably later today. But thank you all, and thank you to our presenters. You guys were awesome.
Thank you.
Thank you.
It was a lot of fun.
Bye.
Bye.